Hello everyone! I recently asked on my Instagram account which of a few different video ideas you all wanted to see first, and the answer was a Copacetic Cosmetics updated overview and comparisons video. So that is what I'm bringing to you today. These are all of my Copacetic Cosmetics shadows, and I'm going to be swatching all of them for you and then doing comparisons at the end. So if that sounds interesting to you, then go ahead and just keep on watching and subscribe. I want to go ahead and start off with some general information about the brand and my experience with the brand, and then we'll get into the swatches, but I'll leave timestamps below if you just want to get into the juicy swatches right off the bat. I've purchased from the Copacetic Cosmetics online store 4 times, and I also have purchased once in person at the Polish and Beauty Expo. So in total, I've come back to the brand 5 times, if that gives you an idea of how I feel about them. I do think that generally they have beautiful shadows at a very competitive price point, but I will say not all are made equal. So if you are looking at picking some shadows up from Copacetic, I do recommend trying to find some swatches of those shadows that aren't only just on the website, like actual consumers' swatches, because I find that sometimes what you see on the website isn't exactly what it looks like in person. So I would definitely check out some consumer resources before picking up anything from this brand. Shipping wise, my most recent order took the longest out of the 4 that I've placed, but the brand also was very transparent. They were within the shipping time that they list on their website, which is 15 to 30 business days. And they also were communicative the entire time, like up until my order was sent out, saying like, hey, we're behind on orders, all of this. So in that front, they're pretty good about being transparent about how long it's going to take, but it can take a while. Customer service-wise, though, Olivia and her team are awesome. If you don't know, Copacetic is a family-owned brand, and the owner is Olivia and her husband, and they have some of their other family members that work with them, and they are all very, very nice. I've gotten to meet her and her husband, and I've talked to her on Instagram quite a bit. She is consistently engaging with customers on Instagram, which I think is awesome, and I love to see from these smaller brands. In our most recent conversation, Olivia actually gave me a non-affiliate code to give to you all in case you do want to purchase from the brand, which is pretty exciting. This is my first code, and it's just Catherine B. So you can use that at checkout to get 10% off of your order. I don't earn any commissions or anything off of that, so it's just a coupon for you all to use. But I will also say that Copacetic has some pretty sweet deals throughout the year. Specifically, they have an anniversary sale that takes place every year around the 4th of July, and it's typically like a week long. That is a great time to shop from the brand because they have some pretty stellar deals. Typically, their standard shadows are $5 a piece, and during the sale, they can range from like $3 to $2, which is a pretty great deal. Then their multi-chromes are typically $13, and I've seen those get down to $9 and $10 during that sale, so that's definitely a good one to check out. I also think that they do a very competitive Black Friday sale, so if you're willing to wait, those are probably the 2 best times to buy. Each month, the brand also comes out with a new collection of typically 5 single shadows, and they have what they call a $2 Tuesday, where when those shadows launch on that Tuesday, they are $2 instead of $5 for that day. So it can be a great way to get a deal each month if you're interested in the new shades that are coming out. So with all of that general information out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into some swatches. First up is the shade Bubbly Clouds. This is just a standard shadow from them, so it's at that $5 price point. And I was looking for a purple iridescent, and this is the one that Olivia actually recommended. But I have to be honest, this is probably one of my least favorite shadows I've tried from them. It actually is on the chopping block. I've got like a little palette of a few singles that I'm planning on decluttering, and this is one of them. I just find that it has a very heavy base to it for an iridescent shadow. Like even outside of the light, it pretty much looks exactly the same. And there's not a whole lot of shine happening with this one. To me, it just kind of looks a little bit dusty. So I would personally say to skip this one, but this is a prime example of not all of their shadows being made equal, because I have another standard iridescent that I'll show you here in a few swatches, and I think that one's really beautiful. So that's why I say again, definitely check out some swatches of each of the shadows to really get an understanding of what you think they may look like in person. Next up, we have what is an iridescent multi-chrome. So this one is at that $13 price point, and this is the shade Kitty Cafe. This one is very beautiful, and I feel like right away you can see that texture difference, how this one's a lot shinier. It's a little bit flakier, sparklier, but it can be smoothed out to a pretty good, like, shiny, sparkly finish with not a whole lot of visible texture. This one does have a shift on it, so it kind of goes from a purple to a pink to an orangey gold. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to capture those shifts for you on camera, but again, you can see that it is pretty transparent in the base compared to that first one. I will say though, I do think that this shade is very similar to the Divina Iridescent Soda Swamp, and that one is $8. So even at that discounted price of like $9 to $10, this one is more expensive than the Divina shade. So for that reason, I don't know if this is one that I would recommend you seek out, especially if you already have Soda Swamp in your collection, but it is a beautiful shadow on its own. Next, we have another iridescent multi-chrome. This is the shade Floriage, and this one is beautiful. So this one, we've got a little bit more of a base color, almost like a little bit gray, but do you see that shift? So we've got like a pretty strong pink that turns into an orange and then a gold, and I would say it even goes like a little bit green as well. It is a beautiful shade with a very pronounced shift, and I think you can maybe see the difference in formula. This one's flakier, more truly iridescent in that there is no base in it, whereas this one has more of a base and a finer, more consistent shimmer, but is a lot shiftier. This came in a collection of 3 shades, and I would definitely recommend this iridescent collection over this one. I don't have this shade to confirm, but I think that this is probably a pretty good dupe for the shade Radar from Shine by SD Cosmetics. We'll look at another comparison here in a bit, but this one is a pretty good deal at $13, and again, if you can get it at that lower like $10 price point, it's an even better deal. So this is one I definitely recommend. Now next up, we have another $5 iridescent, just standard shade. This is the shade Googly Bear, and this is an iridescent shadow that I really like at that $5 price point. You can see it still does keep that kind of base throughout it, no matter if it's in the light or not. But do you see that beautiful shine that this one has? No real sparkle with this shade. It's more of a sheen, or like kind of like a glow almost. It is beautiful. I imagine that this could be a nice highlight on people, especially if you've got a lighter skin tone like me, or if you sheer it out to get rid of more of that base. This one though, I really like, and just again reinforces sometimes it can be a little less shiny, sometimes a little more shiny. So again, I'll say it one last time, be sure to check and make sure that the shades that you're getting are going to be ones that are to your preference when it comes to formula. The last iridescent shade that I have is another multi-chrome. This is the shade Garden Picnic, and this is one that I've had for a little over a year at this point, and I love it. This one, again, has a little bit more of a base, whereas this one, Foliage, has kind of a bluish gray base. This one has a little bit of like a pinky base almost, but then on top it's got a golden sparkle that goes to a green and then a teal and a blue. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get that tealy blue, but I think I can get that stronger green on the edge there. And again, this is another shade that I've seen from other brands at a more expensive price. So this is definitely one to keep on your radar. And this shade is from the same collection as Foliage, which I feel like you can tell based on the finish of them compared to, again, Kitty Cafe, which is from that other multi-chrome iridescent collection. Now we're moving into some yellows, and we're going to start off with two that are pretty similar. So first up is the shade 1400 Degrees, which is one that Olivia's husband made, and then we've got the shade Triforce. So first up, 1400 Degrees, it's a pretty like true kind of canary yellow. Very sheer though, you're not getting a ton of base color in this shade. And then on top you've got some yellow and silver sparkles. I find that this one smooths out pretty evenly to a nice even sparkle. And I would say that the particle size is definitely small to medium, more in between these two types of formulas rather than specifically like the same as either or. Triforce has a little bit more of a banana yellow base. It's a little bit brighter, and on top it's got, again, kind of yellow and silver sparkles. I would definitely recommend the shade 1400 Degrees over Triforce if you're looking for something that's sparkly. This one I just feel has a little bit more sparkle in it, whereas that base can kind of take away from the sparkle in Triforce. And I do find both of these to be a little bit harder to apply evenly every time. They've swatched out pretty well on my arm, but on the eyes it can be a little challenging to work with. So keep that in mind if you're looking at picking up either of those. This is the shade Lemon Water, and this is classified as a shifting shimmer, so it's at a $7 price point. This is our first one of these shifting shimmers, but it won't be the last. You would expect this one to be more yellow based on the pan, but in reality, it's got a pretty gray, translucent kind of base. And then on top, it's got a pink sparkle that goes into kind of like a peachy orange. And you can get glimpses of that yellow in person, especially out in like natural lighting. But it's definitely not like a yellow shadow in the classic sense. I do think though, this is a beautiful one. I really enjoy this shifting shimmer formula. I find it to, again, be like a small particle size, definitely smaller than these other two on top of it, and more sparkly consistently, if that makes sense. But I definitely do want to point out that these shifting shimmer shadows are a bit more textured, which I feel like you can see here compared to something especially like Googly Bear. So if you don't like that more textured type of shadow, I'm not sure that you would like these, so keep that in mind before making a purchase of any of the shifting shimmers. Now we've got another multi-chrome. This is the shade Fiesta, and this is probably one of like my top 5 from Copacetic. It's got a mustard yellow base, but again, not super opaque as you can see here. And then on top, we've got a shimmer that shifts from a bright green to teal to blue to purple. It is like one of those types of shadows that is the whole rainbow in a single shadow. It is really, really beautiful. I don't have the shade Fairy Fire from Divina, but I know that this is basically an exact dupe, and that shade is $17 compared to $13, which can get down to about $10, so definitely a great deal. And I do have another dupe to show you once we get to that section of the video. Now getting into some more golden shades. This first one is the shade Oh My Gourd. and this is a really pretty one. If I remember correctly, this is considered a shifting shimmer, so it's that $7 price point. I do find that a little interesting though, because this one has a kind of smaller particle size than some of the other shifting shimmers that I have. Either way, truly a beautiful shade. Not a whole lot of shift happening in my opinion. We've kind of got like this dark gold base with a golden sparkle on top that has a green sparkle throughout, but I don't really see that shifting in the way that you think of like a multi-chrome or duochrome, but you can definitely see those multicolored sparkles within this shade. Next, we have a flaky shade called How Wooed from Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars. So if you haven't tried a flaky, this is still at that $5 price point, but it has a very different texture. I've just set it down a little bit, and I feel like right off the bat you can see that flaky really is the perfect name for this type of shadow. It has a much larger particle size, and it is more inconsistent, but you can lay it down to apply a very textured sparkle, and it is really pretty, but they are tough to work with. I feel like in my experience with other creators on Instagram, you either love flakies or you really don't love flakies. I think I might be actually leaning towards the don't love flakies camp the more and more I try them, but out of the flakies that I have tried, this is probably like one of my favorites. I find this to be a beautiful color. We've kind of got like a rose gold kind of base with a gold and silver sparkle on top, and it is really pretty. And the way that I like to use these the best is I'll use it with a brush or lightly dust it onto my eyes, especially over top of a less sparkly shade, so that way it doesn't take away from the shade that I have below it and like the color that it is, but it adds a nice sparkle on top. Now we've got another standard shade. This is Fun Shine, and this one is kind of another one of those like glowy shades. So the particle size on this is very like kind of small to even micro, and it reminds me a lot of Googly Bear and its finish, so it's kind of more of like a glowy shimmer. And this one has a little tiny shift from like more of a peachy orange to a golden orange, but really it is just kind of like a transparent, maybe translucent base with that orange glow on top. And I love to use this as an inner corner highlight. I actually picked this one up in person because it's exactly what I've been looking for, which is just an orange, light, bright shade to use when highlighting. So I really love this one, but it's definitely not like the most special out of the shades that I've swatched here or the rest of the shades that I have to show you. This next shade is Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, and this one is considered a multi-chrome, but it's at a much lower price point. Off the top of my head, I think it's either $7 or $9, but I need to double check the website on that. This one though has a kind of peachy orange base, and then on top it's got this greenish gold to orangey red kind of shift. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to capture that shift. It actually reminds me a lot of the really popular shift that we've been seeing from other brands like Cleona, Terra Moons, Divina. Divina's version is Frothy Surf, and that's one that I have. And I also have the Looksy version, but all of those shades have a much deeper orange as the base color. This one has a much lighter orange, and in that way it's pretty unique. I don't have anything quite like this in my collection, even though I have shift siblings. All right, I think we're gonna end with this one on my current arm. This is another shifting shimmer shade called Tango. So it's got an orange base with a pink sparkle on top. And I think you can see how it is more textured. It needs to kind of be like built up and smoothed out to get that really sparkly, even finish. So again, maybe not everyone's preferred formula type, but I love it. And I feel like right here, you can see that shift pretty dang well. It is a really pretty one. One that when I got it wasn't my favorite, but in my new orange renaissance I've been going through, I've been gravitating to this shade a lot more frequently. I'm going to go ahead and keep all of these shades swatched on this arm for now, and then we'll swatch as many as we can on this arm before I take them off and start swatching new shades on this side. Alright, so the first shade on this arm is going to be Centennial Wheel. This is a multi-chrome, and it goes from that pink to an orange, gold, and even a tiny bit green. Don't expect a whole lot of green though, like when I say that. It really is at the harshest angles, and it's more of like a chartreusey kind of color. This shade is a lot flakier though. If I remember correctly, they call it like a flaky chrome, but I don't think it's very similar to like the actual flaky shades. This one I find does apply a lot more evenly, and with a glitter glue especially, I can get a pretty opaque layer of this shadow. If you've been here before, you've probably heard me say that this is a pretty strong dupe for the shade Flare Star from Terra Moons, which is a lot more expensive at like $17.50, I want to say. So definitely a better alternative, especially if you're willing to do a little bit more work, lay down a glitter glue to apply it, all of that stuff. The base on it is actually pretty transparent except for those flaky bits that like you're applying. So like you can see, it's not super even on my skin right now. And then really what you're getting is just the color that comes from those flaky bits. So don't expect a whole lot of base color from this shade. I think that this is going to be the best angle that I can get to show you the shift on this shade. So I'm not quite able to show you the green, but it definitely does go a little bit leaning chartreusey. Next, we've got the shade Transmutation. This is a shifting shimmer, so again, it's at that $7 price point normally, but this one is a dupe for a lot of different shades from different brands. This one, though, is the most affordable version that I have found, and I actually really like this version, but I know some of you have gotten this based on my videos and not loved it, so that's why I want to say, like, it is definitely a more textured shadow, so if that's not your thing, you probably won't like this one. This has, like, a kind of berry base to it with a really like neutral kind of gold to blue sparkle on top that then can go to a more extreme blue. Maybe you can see it a little bit there, but I'm not sure how well I'll be able to capture that. One though, again, in the base, you can really see how it's not even, if that makes sense. So there are textured bits. You can work it in and like smooth it out to get a little less texture on there, but it is definitely a more textured shadow. But the result of that is that you get like these insane sparkles. Next up, this is the shade Eat the Rich. This is a hollow multi-chrome, and this one is really pretty, but it's not my favorite. First of all, the texture of it is kind of dry and a little bit gritty. It almost feels a little sandy. Also, I'm not really getting a whole lot of multi-chrome, and I honestly think that like the hollow pieces in here make it a little bit more dull. So you aren't getting a ton of sparkle, not a ton of shift, and that holographic sparkle is really hard to catch unless you plan on just like having your phone flash directly on you all night. So this one isn't my favorite, but I have a newer hollow chrome shade, which is like a multi-chrome hollow hybrid. This is the shade Empyrean, and it is really shifty and beautiful, and that hollow is just kind of a bonus feature and not the main attraction. So first of all, I feel like you can see how much more sparkly and shifty this shade is. It has like a purple base that then has a pink sparkle that then goes to a gold and even like green, which I'm not sure if I'll be able to capture, but there's my best attempt. But it is really, really beautiful, and so I think that they have improved the hollow formula since this first batch came out. So if you tried one of these original ones and it scared you off, I was there with you, but it has gotten a lot better, and now I want to get the other two from this collection of hollow shadows. Warning though, I have worn this one on the eyes just on its own, and it did stain, so keep that in mind if you really don't like staining. This next shade is Missy, and this isn't a full flaky, it's like a flaky hybrid, so it has a base shadow like kind of color in there, and then it's got flaky pieces on top. I do find that this is easier to work with than like just the straight up flaky shades, because it just doesn't look quite as patchy if you're using it on its own. But it also is definitely not my favorite out of, my whole set of arms here. And so I wouldn't necessarily like suggest you run and pick this one up. I do think that other brands have similar colors in a formula that I like a little bit better. This next shade is another shifting shimmer. This is one of like the original shifting shimmers. It's got a really deep purple base with a purpley, like pinkish to kind of like peachy gold sparkle on top. Again, I'll try my best to capture that. I feel like you can see like that peachy kind of color right there. But again, really just want to emphasize that these ones don't have the most consistent base on them, so definitely keep that in mind. I'm not like a dark vampy kind of eyeshadow girly normally, so this one isn't my favorite, but if this is like a kind of color that calls to you, I do think that the formula is very consistent with the other shifting shimmer shades. Next, we've got Blossom, and this is, I believe, a collaboration with Panda Replay on Instagram. She's super sweet. I'll link her Instagram down below. We've got a really deep, like juicy purple base on this, kind of like a muted grayish purple, and then on top we've got a green sparkle, and you can see it kind of goes a little bit pinky in the sparkle as well. If I remember right, I think that this is classified as a multi-chrome, but I think it's at that $7 price point, same as bed knobs and broomsticks. This next shade is Cuddles, and this is one at that standard $5 price point, and this is a beautiful shade. It honestly has blown me out of the water. It is a more recent pickup for me. This one's got a kind of magenta-y base with a blue sparkle on top with a silver sparkle throughout as well. And I'm not sure if you can see, but that sparkle particle is like small, more so than like maybe micro or like sheeny like Blossom is. And I find it to be just really, really beautiful, especially like if you just want to throw on one shadow, blend it out, and be done. This is a great one for that on my skin tone. This is another one that has really impressed me. This is the shade Malware. So this one's got a light pastel lilac kind of base with a green to pink shift on it. And if you want to love the looksy shade Ube, but you don't get along with their formula, it's like too creasy for you, I think that this is what you've been looking for. It is like the exact same as Ube, but honestly even maybe more sparkly, and it's got that drier copacetic formula that you may like more if you don't like Looksy's formula. Now we've got two multi-chromes. So first up, that's on my index finger, is the shade Excellence, and then on my middle finger is the shade Escape Room. I find that these two are pretty similar in the shift. Not exactly the same though. So they both have kind of like a pinky purple to a green, but I find that Excellence goes a little bit more gold than Escape Room does. So this is the shade Excellence. This is a direct dupe for like Lunar Lavender from Touch of Glam or Revenge from Shine by SD. And then we've got Escape Room. So you can see Escape Room definitely a lot lighter, which like for some people may be better. Like I find it kind of hard to work with some of like these deeper shades, just day to day. So in that sense, like Escape Room might be a better option for you, but I feel like hopefully here you can see how Excellence does go more gold than Escape Room does. But other than that, the shifts are pretty similar. And then here's a better look at those base colors. So Excellence has that really deep kind of bluish base, whereas Escape Room is pretty much like translucent, if not full-on transparent. Now we've got a traditional shade. This is the shade Bermuda, and I would say that this shade reminds me of something that you might find more in like a mainstream palette formula-wise. It's definitely more of like that sheeny kind of shade and not like sparkly at all. This one has a dusty kind of blue jean base with a gold sheen on top that can kind of shift. And it's a really interesting kind of shift, you know, from that cool to warm. And I really do enjoy this shade for that reason. But this isn't necessarily my favorite formula. I definitely prefer something a little more sparkly. Although this is like a great one if I wanted to tap like a flaky, like How Wooed on top of. I feel like that is the exact way to use that kind of flaky shade on top of the more standard kind of shimmer. You can see the flakies on top. All right, so this one is called Hero of Legends. This is another $5 shade, which I'm really shocked by because it is beautiful. It goes from like this bright green to a purple, and then it's got kind of a gray-ish kind of base on there, if you can see that. But it is a really just beautiful shade, and I think you can see that shift a little bit there. But the sparkle on this one is really, really nice. I wore this to Sephora recently, and I got asked about it while I was out. That's always a good sign. And then we've got the shade Biennium. This one is another multi-chrome, so it's at that $13 price. And it's got a kind of sheer green base on it with a green sparkle on top. And this one does shift to like a blue and then also a purple, although I don't find this to be the most shifty out of the different multi-chromes that I've tried from them. And then really quickly before we wrap up this arm, I do want to jump down here just to compare this shade. This is Icicle Sparkles, and this one has a similar like green and blue thing going on, but it's kind of the more pastel version. You can see that green a little bit in the base, and then you can see that kind of like minty blue sparkle on top. And this one again does shift a touch like purplish, but it's not a strong shift whatsoever. Here are these two arms together. I'm gonna go through the shades on this arm one more time, and then we'll wipe this arm off and start swatching the rest on this arm. On this arm, we have Bubbly Clouds, Kitty Cafe, Foliage, Googly Bear, Garden Picnic, 1400 Degrees, Triforce, Lemon Water, Fiesta, Oh My Gourd, How Wooed, Funshine, Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, and Tango. On this arm, the only one that left like a semblance of a stain was Triforce, but it wiped off really easily with a makeup eraser, so no staining from this top 2 rows of shades. So now we've got 2 shifting shimmers right next to each other, and this is a newer shifting shimmer on my index finger. This one is called Kelp, and the one on my middle finger is called Flourish. So the shade Kelp has a lot more base color to it, whereas Flourish is just kind of that like bright green sparkle without any base. And I'll show you what that means now. And here you can see those differences in the base. So I think that because Kelp has more of a base color, it looks a little less like patchy, you know, when it's not hitting the light. But the formula in them is pretty similar with like the type of sparkle. Both of these tout having kind of like a blue shift, which I don't really see. I think of them as pretty much just a straight up like lime green shadow. And I wouldn't say you need both. It's just a preference of like if you like having a base color on your shadows or not. Personally, I have a soft spot in my heart for the shade Flourish because of my husband. I'll link that video down below if you want to watch and understand why. But I do think that Kelp is really beautiful. I would recommend one or the other though. You definitely don't need both. Now we've got a few different black-based multi-chromes. So on my index finger is the shade Autumn Equinox, and then on my middle finger is the shade Uncharted. You can see they both have that really dark black base. Autumn Equinox has that black base, and then on top it's got kind of an olivey gold that then shifts to more of a true like forest green. And then Uncharted starts off as kind of like a blush color almost, and then goes into a gold and then a pretty strong green. You can see those shifts a little bit better if I move my arm down just a bit. So then the last black-based multi-chrome shade that I have is Falling Leaves. This is kind of that classic black-based multi-chrome shade. It goes from a bright red to a gold and then a green. Falling Leaves is like the perfect name for a shade like this. It's kind of like the more saturated version of something like Uncharted. And if you are looking for a black-based multi-chrome, I really do like Copacetic's version. I think, again, that $13 price point is very competitive, even without that sale potentially on top of it. And these are tougher shades to work with because of that black base, but I have a video showing how I use black-based multi-chromes, so I'll link that below too in case you're curious on how to work with something this stark, especially if you're on the lighter end of the skin tone spectrum. Next we have a standard $5 shade, although I think this might be considered a flaky. I honestly don't know. This is the shade Splendor, and this one is really dimethicone-y. Honestly, it's probably one of my least favorite shades. I'm not quite willing to declutter it at this point, but it definitely is one that I need a very particular reason to reach for. So you can see it's got that really textured and kind of uneven like sparkle on top, which is why I say it reminds me of a flaky, and then it's got that brown base below. This one definitely reminds me more of something like Howlude in the texture and like that truly flaky kind of finish. Next we've got another standard shimmer called Mimosa. This one isn't the most sparkly shade to me. I would say it's more of a micro to small sparkle particle. No shifting on this one, but it's a nice neutral to like just throw on the lids if you're headed out the door. Now we've got the shade Cookie Dough, and this is a part of like a scented collection that they did, and it really does smell like cookie dough, which is kind of crazy. I always just mix this shade together and use it as kind of one shade, and when I do that, it kind of turns into like this beigey kind of shimmer. Nothing super sparkly about it or anything like that. I honestly kind of think of this shade more as a novelty shade because I do find to get it to work out. You can't really see my cookie dough pieces as much, but it's because I swirl it together all the time, and to get an even color, you really do have to kind of work it in. Now is the shade Sparks Fly, and this one's really pretty. It's like a flaky, but it's a lot easier to work with. You can see it applies a lot more right off the bat compared to flakies, which are pretty sparse, I find, when I first apply them. And the perfect example I have is the shade next to it is Pineapple Anise, and this is one that is a true flaky. So if I push down with full pressure, do you see how it doesn't apply as evenly? You really have to like work it in and kind of brush it out, and it gets stuck to your fingers, so you kind of gotta, smooth it out and really work with it. So if you were considering a flaky, I would recommend checking out the shade Sparks Fly first, because I think it has a similar effect, but a lot easier user experience. Next up, we've got the shade Mr. Sparks though, and I don't know if you can tell, but this one does have a dent in it because I love this shade. This is a standard shimmer, but I find it to be a lot more sparkly than something like Cookie Dough or even Mimosa. It's got a beige base, and then it's got a kind of like purple and pinky peach kind of sparkle throughout. It is a really beautiful kind of elevated special neutral shade in my opinion. Next to that, we've got another newer shade for me. This is the shade Princess of Legends, and it is really, really pretty. It's got a very soft pink base. You really can't translate it as pink on the eyes. It kind of just looks like white, honestly, but then it's got a very beautiful sparkle throughout. It's kind of like a silvery sparkle, and In reality, like, it's not like the most special shade, but I just find it to be so glossy and shiny on my lids. I have been really enjoying this. And then the next two are similar color-wise, but very different texture-wise. So first we've got Silenzio Bruno. This is a really interesting kind of taupe shade. It's got like a silver shimmer on top with more of like a taupey base. And then Iron Throne is the more sparkly version. So again, more of a inconsistent base on this one, but still something kind of taupey in it with that silver sparkle on top. And this one really shocked me with how sparkly and beautiful it is. If you prefer these like kind of taupey, you know, cool toned neutrals, this is the one you've been looking for. It is really, really pretty. Then I've just got a few mattes that I want to try to fit on my arm with what's currently on there. First up, on my index finger, we have the shade Sun Glow, and then we have the shade Rose Petal. The Copacetic matte formula is very, very soft. I find that it does build well, but you can see it is really flaky and it does get a ton of kickback in the pan. I do find though that these shadows are pigmented and they do play well with each other, although these next two I do find are a little bit tougher to work with, but I think that's just because of like the really bright colors that they are. So first up, I've got the shade Luca. This is like a bright, almost like neon-y green. And then I've got a really punchy blue shade, which is Cold Shoulder. And I feel like I'm swatching it on the worst part of my arm to show you what it looks like. But we're really fighting for room here. My arms are a complete mess right now. But here are all of the rest of my Copacetic shades, and I'll run through the names one more time really quick. On this arm, we have Centennial Wheel, Transmutation, Eat the Rich, Empyrean, Missy, Necromancy, Blossom, Cuddles, Malware, Excellence, Escape Room, Bermuda, Hero of Time, Biennium, and Icicle Sparkles. On this arm, we have Kelp, Foliage, Autumn Equinox, Uncharted, Falling Leaves, Splendor, Mimosa, Cookie Dough, Sparks Fly, Pineapple Anise, Mr. Sparks, Princess of Legends, Silenzio Bruno, Iron Throne, Sunglow, Rose Petals, Luca, and Cold Shoulder. I want to go ahead and speed run some dupes. If you do not see a shade here, it is because I just didn't think I had a close enough dupe to warrant including it in this section of the video. First up though, on my index finger, we have the Copacetic shade Centennial Wheel, which again, a little bit flakier. You can see how it's getting stuck to my finger a little bit. If I laid down a glitter glue, that wouldn't be as much of an issue, but I want to show you what they're like just off the bat. And then here is the shade Flare Star from Terra Moons. So you can see that price point may be coming into play in how easily it applies, but with a little legwork, I think that the Centennial Wheel shade is the same exact result at almost half the price. Next up, I'm gonna go ahead and put the shade Transmutation in the middle, so that way we can compare it to two different shades. So that of course is the Copacetic shade. Then above it, I'm gonna go ahead and put the shade Gleam from Glaminatrix Cosmetics. If I remember right, I think this might be like $10. So if you're in Australia, it may be a good alternative so you don't have to pay, you know, customs and all of that. But in the US, definitely I would stick with Transmutation. Now we've got Starburst from Terra Moons. And this one I would say is even closer texture-wise, but still is $1.50 more at full price than the Copacetic shade. Now I've got the shade Empyrean, and I'm gonna go ahead and put that one lower because the two shades I want to compare it to are exact dupes. So this first one is from Glam Shop, and it is Magical Unicorn. And then we have the shade Glam Rush from Shine by SD. You can see they're not exactly the same because of that hollow, like really textured sparkle in the Copacetic version, but the shifts on these are pretty much identical, as are the base colors, although this one is, again, a little more patchy in the base, but a lot more sparkly in the light. Then I wanted to put the shade Chasing Comets from Terra Moons, which I find to be similar but darker. And I also wanted to compare that to Necromancy from Copacetic because it shares that dark purple base. But I do recognize that these two aren't very similar. I just figured for posterity's sake, I would include all of these in some sort of a comparison. Now we've got the Copacetic shade Cuddles compared to the Glam Shop shade Lavender. I think that these in concept are similar, but I do think that they have one distinct difference, being that in Cuddles, you're kind of getting more of a multicolored sparkle, whereas in Lavender, you're only getting that blue. But you can see the base colors are actually pretty similar, which is why it's interesting that on top, they look more different than you might expect. And the last comparison that we'll do for now is the shade Malware, and we're gonna compare that to the Pastel Roses shade Unicorn, which I think is a much more satiny version of this type of shade. Definitely not nearly as impactful and way more expensive. So Copacetic wins on this front. However, Ube from Looksy is more inexpensive at a $3 price point, but it also has a much more slippy formula. And so if you don't like that, or you find that that creases on your eyes too badly, then I do think that the Copacetic version is a good alternative. I've got a little bit of a pinky stain going on. That is from the shade Glam Rush from Shine by SD. If you're curious, I find that that one stains very badly. But continuing on with our comparisons, we've got the shade Escape Room, and I want to compare that to the shade Moon from Pastel Roses UK. So I actually think that these are really similar, which I did not expect when I picked up Moon, because I already had Escape Room from Copacetic. Moon has much more of a base, whereas we've talked before about how the base in Escape Room is pretty light, but shift-wise, they're like the same. Moon is less expensive, but it does stain, which you can see on my finger. And also, Pastel Roses has kind of a reputation for expiring a lot faster than other brands. So in this instance, it may be worth going with Escape Room, especially if you're in the US. Now we've got Excellence compared to Revenge from Shine by SD. And as I mentioned before, this is also a dupe for Lucid Lavender by Touch of Glam, but I do not own that shade. Now we've got Icicle Sparkle compared to the Pastel Roses shade Fairy. Fairy's got much more of like an actual green base on it, and it does have a much more apparent purple shift, but it was the closest thing that I had to compare, so I figured it still may be helpful for some of you all. I find Silenzio Bruno to have something kind of similar to one of the shades from the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette, although I think that Silenzio Bruno has a stronger silver on top, but the base colors are very, very similar. So if you've been wanting that particular shade from that palette, it may be worth checking out Silenzio Bruno from Copacetic. This isn't a perfect dupe, but I wanted to show the shade Iron Throne in comparison to Lucent Ray from Divina. Iron Throne is less expensive, and I actually prefer that shade over Lucent Ray. I also find Lucent Ray stains pretty badly, so Iron Throne may be a good alternative if you're looking for a super sparkly, silvery, kind of like taupe shade. We'll go ahead and do these two mattes really quickly. So this is the shade Rose Petal, and I wanted to compare it to Looksy Forever. I find that Forever is a little bit more true pink. Rose Petal has something a little bit warmer about it, but I thought it was a worthy comparison. And then I want to compare Luca to the Terra Moons matte Fourth Dimension, which I really love, but I think that Terra Moons is moving away from mattes, and I'm moving away from Terra Moons as a brand a little bit. So I thought this might be a good comparison if you're looking for a super bright, punchy green, but you can't get the fourth, but you can't get the Terra Moon shade, or you just don't want to. I figured I would move my arm up into the light a little bit more so you can see those shifts a little bit better. Now I'm gonna go wash off my arm and hopefully do like just one last thing of comparisons. We'll see if we can make them all fit. All right, now we're getting into some black-based multi-chromes. So this is the shade Uncharted from Copacetic compared to Everest from Shine by SD. And these two are like 100% dupes. Now we've got Falling Leaves compared to Fairy Tales from Shine by SD. And the color shifts on this are very much so dupes, but I way prefer the Copacetic version of this shade over the Shine by SD one. And then we've got the shade Autumn Equinox, and I want to compare it to a multi-chrome from the Touch of Glam palette, Bad Batch. This is specifically the shade Low Tolerance, and I was given this by my friend Riley, who I love dearly, and I'm so grateful. I'm grateful that because of that, I can pass along this comparison to you all. Now on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have a few iridescent comparisons to do. So this is Kitty Cafe, and I want to compare it to Divina Soda Swamp, just so you can see what I was talking about earlier. These two are very, very similar. I think that maybe Kitty Cafe goes to a more bright purple, but I don't know if that's worth the pretty big price difference on those two shades. And I know you're probably thinking that Foliage from Copacetic does not look anything like this shade Good Intentions from Shine by SD in the pan, but I think that they have something more in common once you swatch them out. You can see Good Intentions is a little bit more true red, whereas Foliage is more of a pink, but the shifts that they do are pretty dang similar. And that base color is very similar as well. Now we've got Googly Bear compared to Visions from Pastel Roses. Texture-wise, these are very different, but they both are like just straight up green kind of iridescent shades. I think I was a little too optimistic to think that I could get all of these done with one more arm swatch. So after this swatch, we'll wash off my arm and then I'll do the last set. So we've got Garden Picnic, and I want to compare it to Sugar Dew from Sugar Drizzle Polish. And I actually really prefer the texture of Garden Picnic. And it also is way cheaper than the Sugar Drizzle shade, so I would definitely say go with Garden Picnic. Now we have the shade Fiesta compared to Lucky Charm from Pastel Roses. I did not expect these to be exact dupes, but they definitely are. The texture is a little bit different, but you can see the shift in them is like the same. And like I said before, Fairy Fire from Divina, and I think it's Lyra from Terra Moons are also direct dupes of this shade. Now we have Oh My Gourd compared to Lemon Water from Looksy. I don't think that these are dupes really at all, but I was curious about them, and so I figured if you were curious too, I would show you. Lemon Water is a lot more true gold, whereas Oh My Gourd has those multicolored sparkles throughout. But again, we see pretty similar base colors on those two. Now we've got Gummy, and like I said, the actual tone of this shadow is pretty unique, but the shift is not, so that's what I wanted to show you. So first I'm going to compare it to Looksy Gummy. You can see right off the bat a much deeper orange in the base there. And then I've got Frothy Surf from Divina. And again, deeper base, more sparkly finish. But do you see how it also goes to like those same color shifts? Hopefully you can. And then last but certainly not least, we have the shade
Tango from Copacetic, and I want to compare that to Torch from Cleona. So we've got two very different finishes on these shades, but the shift is pretty similar. Now that we've gone through all of the best dupes that I have to show you, I thought I'd end this video by giving you my top 15 recommendations from Copacetic based on everything I've tried. So first up, we've got the shade Foliage. I think that this is a truly beautiful kind of iridescent shade, and really all three from this collection seem like they are. I don't have the Honey Bunny shade just because I feel like I have a dupe for that, but both Foliage and Garden Picnic are some pretty top tier recommendations that I have because I just find them beautiful and so shifty, so sparkly, and so smooth and easy to work with. Next up, we've got another multi-chrome in Fiesta. Really, just overall, I think multi-chromes are where Copacetic shines the most because they have such a competitive price point in really beautiful multi-chromes. So Fiesta is just another one of those. Oh My Gourd is a really surprising one to me. I don't have anything quite like it because of that multicolored sparkle. And a multicolored sparkle is something that I'm really starting to gravitate towards more and more as time goes on. This is a beautiful one that I think works for every day, but still is special. Centennial Wheel is just a Barbie dream, and it is like a truly like neon kind of shadow in real life. It's really, really stunning. And at that $13 price point, you just can't beat it. Again, Transmutation compared to competitors is just a beautiful shade and shift at a better cost, and because of that, I just love it. I was really apprehensive about Empyrean given my experience with Eat the Rich, but it has surprised me in the best of ways. It is such a beautiful shadow, and I cannot wait to get the other two someday. Cuddles is another one that I honestly hadn't gotten before because I was worried that it would be too similar to other things I have, but it is so special and beautiful and sparkly and easy to wear. Malware is a shade that I have dupes for from other brands, but controversially, I think that it may be my favorite version, even including Ube. It just is so impactful and sparkly right off the jump, and that shift is very apparent. Hero of Time is a beautiful duochrome at an insane price. That $5 price point on this shade is really a bang for your buck, in my opinion. And I can't lie to you, the name also helps win me over on this one because I love a good nerdy reference in an eyeshadow name. Icicle Sparkle is one that I thought was going to be similar to things I already have, but it's not. It's so special, so beautiful. I cannot wait to wear this one winter going into spring. I feel like it is the perfect shade for that time period. Mr. Sparks is another one that I just don't have anything quite like, and it's so easy to wear. Love to slap this one on, but again, it just gives a little something special with those different sparkle colors throughout. Princess of Legends like speaks to my soul. It is so pretty. That sparkle in it is just dainty and beautiful and easy to wear, and I did not expect that from this shade when I picked it up, but I'm so happy that I did. And then lastly, Iron Throne might be the biggest shocker out of the bunch. I did not expect this shade to look as truly stunning as it does. And looking at my top 15, I'm hoping that when you see them, you can understand why they all got a spot on this list, because wowza, my arm is looking gorgeous right now. So this is the end of the video. Let me know your general thoughts about Copacetic in the comments below. If you have any favorite shades or any duds, let us know that as well. And I know that they make a lot of products outside of eyeshadows, so if you have any non-eyeshadow favorites, let us know that. All right, well, that's it. That's the end of the video. If you've made it to the bitter end, I salute you.
Thank you for joining me yet again. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't to see my next video. And don't forget, I do have a code if you do decide you can't wait on these beauties and you want to shop before the next big sale. Until I see you next time, I hope that you stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy. Bye!